Chapter 14, A Very Busy Weekend, Part 2. Tilde tilde asterisk the infiltrator asterisk tilde tilde. The world of dreams shifted and swirled around the infiltrator as it moved, the colors and shapes that represented the real world fuzzy and indistinct. Around it, the dreamers swarmed through the sky and along the ground, going on their lazy way. The infiltrator saw none of that. Though it existed primarily in the dream, its senses were tuned to the real world, every blade of grass, every mote of dust leaving an impression as it etched itself indelibly on the infiltrator's mind and soul. It moved through the shifting dream until it found a place defined by a sense of wrongness, two worlds trying to mesh into one spot. This was the gateway. On the other side, its mission awaited. The infiltrator wasn't capable of fear. It flitted through the gateway without hesitation, as insubstantial as a dream and going unnoticed by any of the beings standing on the other side. Every sense was wide open, measuring and recording every detail it could find. Some time after it began, a jarring sensation indicated the closing of the gateway. It was now cut off from its home world. The infiltrator discovered quickly that the intruders called themselves human, bipedal, with slim-fingered hands and binocular vision. The infiltrator flitted around, unseen, taking in physical characteristics and noting the differences in height and gender, coloration and clothing. No detail was too small, none went unrecorded. The infiltrator tried to interface with the nervous systems of these beings on multiple attempts, slowly and gently so as to avoid notice. For its trouble, it received nothing but chaos and a welter of sensations in return. The humans were simply too alien. It logged these impressions as best it could. It moved on to the machinery, which existed in amazing abundance and variety. The electron flows that made up what passed for the minds of the machines were found to be cold, inflexible and utterly logical. Some form of thought moved through the electronic switches and relays, but it was beyond the infiltrator's ability to decipher it at all. Again, it simply recorded what it found. Progress was slow. There was a great deal of information to record. With very little in the way of context to determine what was important what was not, it resorted to recording very nearly everything. The day faded to night as it toured the complex it found itself in. The structures were made of metals, woods and a variety of shaped silicates, some solid and some transparent. Electrical currents surged everywhere, powering lights, doorways and other devices. Surrounding the complex was a wilderness. It recognized alien varieties of trees, plants and insect life. Directives implanted in the infiltrator's consciousness dismissed these as momentarily unimportant, and it returned to the complex to gather more information. More data was collected, organized and stored. In one of the smaller structures, there was a small mass, semi-organic and placed in the center of some sort of translucent cage. The infiltrator studied it, then attempted to access it. Unlike the machines from earlier, this was cold, lifeless and inert. No impressions to be gained. It left to explore further. It was during the third day of slow, methodical exploration that it found a true oddity. If the infiltrator had been designed with the capacity to be surprised, it would have been. The infiltrator studied the new being it found most carefully. It was quadrupedal, with two each of eyes and ears. And, unlike the original beings, this one had a spiraling horn protruding from its head. This one called itself Pony, specifically a unicorn pony. Of critical importance was the fact that these new unicorn ponies, it eventually found a second one, wore devices containing a small reservoir of ether, which the creatures could manipulate in an extremely flexible fashion. That fact was flagged as critical, as per the caretaker's directives. Again, it tried to interface with the creature that it had found. Again, it received only a chaos of incomprehensible flickering thoughts and emotions, gone too quickly to leave more than the briefest of impressions. On the fourth day, it had explored the facility as best as it could, and had moved outside once again. It examined trees, grasses and wild plants. It catalogued fungi, viruses and bacteria. Each animal it came across, it studied and then tried to interface with. For the most part, it received even worse results than it had with the beings in the complex. However, it seemed to have an affinity for insect life, particularly those that lived in their underground colonies. Only so much can be learned from insects, however. Eventually, it moved on, drifting slowly down the side of the mountain. It was on the sixth day that it felt a familiar sense of convergence. The gateway had been opened once again. The infiltrator abandoned its cataloging and returned quickly to the complex. The data it had needed to be returned to the caretaker as quickly as possible. It was here that the infiltrator ran into something unforeseen by the methodical instructions left to it by the caretaker. The gateway led to a different world, one that bled magic into this world the way sunlight filtered through a window. Through the new portal came a host of creatures, nearly all of them quadrupeds, though some had a pair of wings in addition to the four legs. And, though the infiltrator did its duty to catalog each and every one, it was also caught in confusion, unable to determine which course of action to follow next. Two of its primary directives were in conflict. It was a top priority for it to gather data. It was a top priority for it to retain the ability to return home and report. It needed to gather data from the world on the other side of this new gateway, but it also needed to stay in the current world in order to be able to return to its own. The infiltrator was frozen with indecision for nearly 2 entire days, though it still catalogued everything it could during that time. That new portal remained open throughout. And then, on the third day, something happened that broke the deadlock. A new type of creature came through, blazing with active magic. The infiltrator approached, cataloging everything about this new being that it could detect. Then, as it had with every other life form it had encountered, it tried to interface with the creature's nervous system. Disorientation. A sense of falling while staying still. Being compressed and expanded all at once. And then, minds, tens of thousands of them, all of them aware of the infiltrator's presence, studying it like a spider might study a fly in its web. One mind stood out amongst the teeming multitude. It was stronger by far, holding the threads of all the other minds in an uncompromising grip. This mind examined the infiltrator as closely as the infiltrator had examined the subjects of this world. And then the mind spoke. The language was unknown, but the concepts came across directly from the other mind, bypassing language completely. It asked a question. What are you? Tilde tilde asterisk Luna asterisk tilde tilde. Princess Luna's sitting room often surprised the ponies who visited her chambers. Though, outside of castle staff and guards, there weren't very many of those who made the effort. Being 1,000 years out of your own time could make it difficult to adjust and make friends. The room was circular, typically arranged with low couches, tables and a desk. The ceiling was a hemisphere, painted a sky blue. What had enchanted Luna the most about the room was that it also functioned as a clock. Currently, the miniature sun was beginning its descent along a nearly hidden rail, indicating that it was now getting to be later in the afternoon. The ticking of clockwork was an ever-present background noise, which Luna found somewhat comforting. Time was moving with her, now, rather than leaving her behind. At night, the brightest and most consistent of the stars would make an appearance across the clockwork sky, running across the ceiling along with a mechanical moon that accurately represented the current moon phase, even centuries after it had been built. The room clock was a work of pure genius, and Luna regretted that she'd never been able to meet the stallion responsible for the design of it. The nature of the room meant that there were no external windows. If desired, the mechanical sun had an enchanted crystal that would glow at whatever brightness the occupant wished for. This suited Luna well, as she more often used the room for meditation or reading than she did for receiving guests. Today, though, she had prepared the room for her first student in centuries, making minuscule adjustments to the cushions and tables in between bouts of pacing while glancing at the false sun to estimate the time. The tea had been brewed, the tiny glazed cakes were arranged on their elegant silver platter, and the candles were lit. Luna was in the process of rearranging the cushions once again when a knock sounded, causing her to half spread her wings while her heart began climbing up into her throat. The door opened, and Twilight Sparkle came trotting into the room, bringing with her a set of modest saddlebags and an eager smile. Princess Luna cleared her throat and smoothed her feathers. "Welcome, Twilight Sparkle," she said with what she hoped was a welcoming smile. "Thank you, Princess." Twilight looked around the room, glancing at the candles first, and then the cushions. "Is this where the lessons will take place?" "For now, yes. Once enough of the applicants are approved, we will move these lessons to a larger venue." Luna allowed herself a small smile at that. Being a princess meant being able to delegate unpleasant and repetitive tasks, such as reviewing the applications for the dream guard that had already begun to pour in. She extended a wing, taking in the circle of cushions with a gesture. "Please, have a seat wherever you like." The young unicorn folded her legs underneath her as she lay down on the cushion. Luna knelt down on a similar cushion directly across from Twilight. She looked up, noting with some surprise that Twilight's horn was glowing, and that she had already armed herself with several blank scrolls, quills and ink pots from her saddlebags, all suspended in her lavender aura. Luna chuckled. "You may put those away, Twilight. You will be learning by doing, not by writing." Twilight's eyes widened while her ears drooped. I won't be taking notes." "No need, though of course you may write down your impressions after the lesson is over." Luna's mouth curled up in a small smile. "Dream magic is taught by doing, not by reading." "Oh." Twilight somehow managed to pack a great deal of uncertainty and disappointment into that one syllable. After a moment of hesitation, the scrolls started rolling back up as the inkwells capped themselves. A rising panic in Luna's throat prompted her to cough uncomfortably. She'd barely begun, and now her sister's student was already disappointed in the lesson she was providing. Well, perhaps it would be appropriate for me to explain, briefly, what the dream realm actually is. You could take notes on that. Would that be sufficient?" A look of pure joy suffused Twilight's face as she broke into a beaming smile. Her horn glowed, and once again her stationery made an appearance. Luna eyed the quills poised eagerly over parchment with a wary eye. "This will simply be a summary, Twilight. There are several books from my private section of the Royal Library that I can assign as reading for further detail. Is that acceptable?" Twilight's eyes widened at the mention of books, followed by an eager squeak at the mention of a private section. She gave an eager nod. "Very well." Luna broke out a quill and paper, quickly scrawling down the names of several books. 2 of those were well-preserved copies of works she had written herself a millennia ago. She signed it, then stamped it with her personal seal before passing it over to Twilight, who took it with a gleeful smile, scanned it briefly, then stowed it carefully in her saddlebag. When Twilight was done securing the list of books, Luna cleared her throat and began speaking, trying not to be unnerved by the scratching of Twilight's quill as she took notes. "There is the physical world, the one which we inhabit and see with our waking eyes. There is the magical field, which encompasses all life and energy that make up our world. And, between those two, there is the realm of dreams. Every awareness, from the most simple to the most complex, has a place there. If it dreams, it has a presence. I cannot tell you if the dream realm already existed before consciousness, or if consciousness somehow called it into being. All I can tell you is that, as long as there have been minds capable of dreaming, there has been a dream realm, connecting every sentient creature to one another. It is a place where our consciousness roams." The scratching quill stopped. Luna looked over to see that Twilight had raised a hoof. "Yes, Twilight." "Do you mean, subconscious?" Twilight asked. "You know, dreams, and all." Luna smiled. "The subconscious is a subset of the consciousness. It is often the most open part of a pony's mind. However, it is not the subconscious mind which will be the target of my lessons. To learn dream magic, I must teach you how to reach it with the conscious mind." "Ooh," Twilight said as the scribbling resumed. Luna smiled. Teaching her sister's protege was going better than she had thought it would. A word of warning, Twilight Sparkle. The dream realm is a world all its own, with its own rules and dangers. There are creatures that can live there without ever once touching the physical world. I have visited there nearly every night that I have lived, and I have seen things of such unimaginable beauty that it staggered my very soul. I have also seen things of such unimaginable horror that even the thought of it today makes me wish to hide myself. Beauty and danger often go side by side in the dream realm. Sometimes they are the same thing. You must promise me before we begin that you will not enter this place on your own until I tell you that you are ready." Twilight gulped visibly and nodded. "I promise, Princess. While we are alone together, you may call me simply Luna," Luna replied with an encouraging smile. Twilight returned a bashful smile of her own. "Now, I believe that is sufficient notes to get you started, along with the reading I will assign you later. Shall we get started?" Twilight glanced at the scant few lines she'd written on her parchment. "Are you sure?" "Trust me," Luna said quickly, "there is much to learn, but you won't be in the correct frame of mind to learn it if you are writing at the same time." Twilight blinked. "Really?" "Yes," Luna replied with a nod. "Writing requires concentration, whereas dream magic, at least in the beginning, requires an inward focus. A much different kind of focus than writing requires. Are you prepared to begin?" Any hesitation or disappointment that might have been in Twilight's expression vanished instantly, as the mare perked up and her eyes widened. Yes, very good. First, we must attend to your breathing. Tilde tilde asterisk Erin asterisk tilde tilde. Cloudsdale, Cloudsdale, Dinky sang out, standing on her hind hooves with her little muzzle pressed up against the portal set into the airship's passenger section. Her rear hooves pranced on the back seat, her tail swishing excitedly. I can see it. Can you see it? Yes. Erin exclaimed, her own muzzle pressed against another porthole. Oh, wow, it's amazing. The airship was on its final approach, coming in towards a dock-like structure that was constructed out of what Erin recognized to be cloudstone. The fact that they'd been approaching the city had been evident for a while now. The great mass of clouds had first been spotted within minutes of the departure from Canterlot, but now they filled the entire sky. They'd been passing clusters of cloud homes, somewhat similar to rainbow dashes, for the last 10 minutes or so, which Erin assumed were some sort of cloud-based suburbs. But it wasn't until the airship began to turn for its final approach that Erin could clearly make out the entirety of the city itself. Erin gaped as the city came into view, her eyes flicking everywhere as she tried to take it all in at once. Great masses of white cloud stretched as far as she could see, some of them natural and others sculpted and shaped to make buildings and roadways. Waterfalls, some made of what looked like liquid rainbows, cascaded towards the ground from many different locations, often diffusing into nothingness before they reached the ground. The city wasn't made up of a singular mass of clouds as Erin had expected. Instead, there were islands of various sizes and shapes, many of them connected by bridges made of cloudstone. Some of the cloud islands were higher than others, making Cloudsdale a multi-layered city. What amazed Erin the most was the fact that there were apparently parks with actual grass and trees here and there. For a moment, the exact how of it escaped her until she realized that it would be easy enough to pile some soil on top of cloudstone in order to grow plants. For Erin, all of this only served to make her enthusiasm grow. The airship, which had seemed fast enough before, now seemed painfully slow. As the dock crept closer and closer, Erin began fidgeting at the window, muttering under her breath and trying to will the airship to move faster. Kind of eager to get there, huh? Ditsy asked. Unlike Erin and Dinky, the grey Pegasus was sitting calmly in her seat, though she had a fond smile for her daughter's antics. Ha, you could say that. Erin managed to tear her eyes away from the vista before her to flash a grin at her newest friend. It's even more amazing than I thought it would be. Several other passengers chuckled at that, and a couple of them snorted derisively, but Erin couldn't even begin to care. Cloudsdale was just outside. When the airship finally docked, Erin couldn't stop herself from prancing in place. Dinky picked up on her enthusiasm and was doing a little dance of her own, much to Ditsy's amusement. At long last, the doors were opened, letting in a gust of cold air. Erin joined the general rush of passengers making their way out past a pair of unicorns, who were busily casting a cloud-walking spell on every non-Pegasus who exited the ship. Erin, still in her green sundress, considered telling them not to bother. Then she remembered how far down the ground was and decided to keep her mouth shut. The spell tingled, causing the hairs on her coat to stand on edge. Under her dress, her wings twitched and her feathers ruffled. Erin shook her head and trotted outside, her hooves bouncing along the springy cloudstone. The wind was the first thing she noticed as it tangled up in her mane and snapped at the hem of her dress. Ditsy and Dinky were right behind her. The three of them stopped a little ways out, standing off to one side in order to let the other passengers pass them. Well, I think we'll head to my aunt's house first, Ditsy said as she tied the string of her white straw hat under her chin to keep it from blowing off. And then we can go out and see the sights. Sounds good. Erin replied. One of the first things that Erin noticed was that very few ponies actually walked in Cloudsdale. At least, not for very long. They would stand around chatting, sure, but as soon as they wanted to actually get somewhere they'd take off and start flying. She also learned to stay well away from the edges of the clouds they walked on. There were rarely safety railings, and the drop to the sparkling lake below caused Erin a bout of nauseous vertigo. The three of them walked off together, moving slowly and talking the whole way. This suited Erin just fine, as she was too busy gaping at all the sights around her. Then she realized that she'd forgotten to take pictures and pulled out her tablet. Dinky and Ditsy both stared at the device, having never seen anything like it before, and Erin had to take a quick break from her sightseeing in order to summarize some of the functions of it. Their pace slowed even further, as Erin stopped every few feet to order her tablet to snap a photo, or to take a video of a rainbow falls or flying Pegasi. It was worth it, though. Both Ditsy and Dinky were thrilled to see themselves on the tablet, and not just in photos. Erin managed to capture a video of Dinky singing an adorable little song about dancing dancy clouds. Is there any way I can get a copy of that? Ditsy asked. I have an old projector that works, sometimes. Can it be put on film, somehow? Maybe, Erin said. I can check on it next week, if you want. That would be great, thanks. Erin smiled, knowing that there was no chance that she'd bother converting Dinky's little dance and song to any type of film, especially since she had no idea if Earth and Equestria had compatible film formats. But she couldn't tell Ditsy that she had her own tablet on the way, or it would completely ruin the surprise. They took some more pictures as the sun crept steadily lower. Finally, Ditsy sighed. This is taking a lot longer than I thought it would. We should really get to my aunt's house. Oh, sorry, Erin replied. I'm just a little excited. I hadn't guessed, Ditsy said wryly. I hadn't guessed, neither, Dinky added. The three of them shared a laugh as they walked the path that would eventually lead to their destination. Tilde tilde asterisk Twilight asterisk tilde tilde. There was a spot on Twilight's back that was itching. Right in the center, at the base of her neck. She cracked an eye open and looked across the circle of cushions on the floor. Across from her, Luna was breathing slowly and steadily with her eyes closed. Twilight decided to risk it. Her horn glowed a soft lavender, lifting up one of the quills from her saddlebags and bringing it back around behind her. A moment later, the nib of the quill was scritching delightfully along the itchy spot. You've lost focus once again, Luna noted without opening her eyes. Twilight swallowed a guilty yelp of surprise and dropped the quill. Sorry, princess, I had an itch. It was distracting me. I understand, Twilight Sparkle, but to enter the dream realm, you must be able to put physical sensations behind you. Luna still hadn't opened her eyes, but she did smile slightly. I know you can do this. You are a talented mare. Twilight glowed briefly before forcing her joy down. Clearing her throat, she settled back down on her cushion, sitting on her rump with her forelegs planted in front of her. It was a pose she could hold comfortably for hours, according to Luna. And, for the first few minutes, that had seemed to be the case. Then the twitches and aches had started, along with the itches. Her back left leg started to feel uncomfortable, but she stifled the urge to shift her weight. Instead, she focused on her breathing. A deep breath in, hold, exhale through the mouth. Then again, this same pattern repeated, with the exact rhythm Princess Luna had instructed her to follow, with Twilight counting the time off between the different parts of the exercise while trying to think of nothing else. Breathe in through the nostrils and hold. Exhale through the mouth. Breathe in, hold, exhale. Am I doing this right? She wondered as she kept breathing in the same pattern. There has to be more to it than just this, but Luna hasn't said anything yet. How will I know without her telling me? Maybe she has some special sense of when the time is right. Maybe I should look and see if she... No, I shouldn't look. Breathe in, hold, exhale. Again. Okay, good. I'm doing well. I just wish that my leg didn't feel like it was going asleep. Maybe Luna wouldn't notice if I just... No, of course she would. Concentrate, Twilight. Just breathe. Right. I wonder what it's like to walk in the dream realms. There aren't any books on it that I ever found, at least not that described what it was actually like to be there. I wonder if Princess Luna's books will tell me. Oh, shoot, I opened my eyes. Okay, Twilight. Focus on the breathing, just like Princess Luna said. Don't think of anything, especially don't think about how your tail is going numb. Good, just breathe. Good. I sure hope I'm doing this right. It seemed like hours of this to Twilight before Luna finally sighed and stood. Twilight opened her eyes and looked at the Luna Princess. A little thrill passed through her as she saw that Luna was smiling at her. Well, I think that's all the further we can go for now, Luna said. I was hoping that I could guide you into the dream realms today, but perhaps next time. Any good feelings that Twilight had felt suddenly dried up and vanished. It felt like the floor had opened up beneath her and sent her tumbling. I failed, she asked, her voice small and disbelieving. Nay, Twilight Sparkle, Luna intoned, shaking her head. If any pony failed today, T was I. Oddly enough, that didn't help Twilight to feel any better. There is a key to getting your mind to relax, I know there is. However, breathing exercises is apparently not it. Or, at least, not without further practice. Twilight's lips felt numb as she spoke. I don't understand. I breathed just like you said to. I know I did. I timed it and everything. The breathing is but one aspect, Twilight Sparkle. The key is to achieve the correct state of mind. Luna smiled and placed a hoof on her shoulder. Your mind races. I could almost feel it galloping along the entire time we were attempting to meditate. My leg was feeling a little stiff, Twilight said defensively. And my tail went numb. And, okay, I had some itches, but... That was not all, Twilight. The gentle way Princess Luna said that brought the sting of tears to Twilight's eyes. It sounded like disappointment to her. You were concentrating when I told you to relax. But you told me to focus on my breathing. Twilight stood up, her heart lurching. That's what I did. I focused and I breathed. Now Luna frowned. It was just a tiny one, barely noticeable, but Twilight still flinched back, expecting more disappointment from the princess. Yes, but only until it becomes automatic, Luna said. At that point, you should begin to enter a meditative state that would allow me to guide you through your first steps into the dream realms. But I can try again. I know I was close. Please, Princess Luna, I know I can. 'Tis enough for one day, Twilight Sparkle, Luna said. To Twilight, it felt like her heart was dissolving. As I said, the fault is not yours. I shall consider alternate methods of getting you into the correct state of mind. Perhaps music. Do you like music? I do, Twilight said, her voice sounding small and tinny in her ears. Then, for our next session, I shall bring in some players. Something soothing and repetitive, I think. Luna nodded. Yes, that may work. Okay, Twilight replied. Worry not, Twilight Sparkle. Every pony is different in this way. We shall succeed eventually, I am certain. Luna's horn glowed, and the door to her sitting room opened. In the meanwhile, continue to practice your breathing exercises in your spare time. Being able to enter a meditative state in that fashion is by far the most simple. You may not always have music available, Yes, Princess, Twilight mumbled. Thank you, Princess. She left the room. For a time, Twilight simply wandered, her mind running over the entire session, trying to find the flaw that had kept her from succeeding. She didn't know how much later it was when she finally came back to herself, but when she did, she found herself in front of a very familiar door. Of course I'd end up here, Twilight said with a chuckle. Her horn lit up and opened the door to the Royal Canterlot Library. 20 minutes later, Twilight was sitting at one of the large black oak tables with a stack of books, all of the ones on Luna's list as well as several on the subject of meditation. The first of them, A Beginner's Guide to Meditation, was cracked open in front of her. Rose quartz *. Equestria to Rosie. Come in, Rosie. Rose Quartz blinked and looked around at the solidly built earth pony mare next to her. It took a moment for her to remember where they were, in the Harmonics Compound's reception area, on the earth side of the gateway. Oh, good, you're awake, Minty said. I was starting to get worried. Rose Quartz shook her head to clear it. Sorry, Minty, I was just a little distracted, is all. No kidding. Minty nudged her with a shoulder, which sent the much smaller unicorn staggering. You've been out of it since you got back from that vacation of yours. She leaned in and whispered into Rose's ear, are you sure you didn't meet a nice stallion while on vacation? No, I didn't. Really? No eyes meeting across a crowded buffet line. No whirlwind romance. Minty grinned and waggled her eyebrows. No, making the six-legged pony. Rose stared at her for a moment until Minty's implication sunk in. Then she reacted the only way she knew how. What? No. Rose glanced around, acutely aware of all the surrounding humans and ponies staring at her. In a fierce whisper, she added, I had a plain old boring vacation. Nothing happened, I swear. Stop being vulgar. Well, something happened, kiddo, Minty said. Then she shrugged and began walking away. Hey, tell me about him later if you want. Rose stared after her, gaping incredulously after the infuriating mare before trotting to catch up. There's no him, okay. Can we drop it? Well, why else would you have spent the last 5 minutes staring blankly at a wall? Minty asked. It wasn't 5 minutes, and I had something on my mind, Rose replied. Look, can we just stop talking about this? Okay, fine. Minty chuckled. I bet he's cute, though. Ugh. Rosie trotted ahead, leaving the irritating mare behind her. The problem was, she really was having a hard time concentrating at the moment. But the last pony she wanted to know about it was Minty. She was better off being by herself to work things through. Fortunately, that wasn't difficult to arrange. The humans had set up a buffet table of light vegetarian snacks. Minty made a beeline over to the table and began helping herself, heaping piles of fruit, cheese and crackers onto a tray. Rose sighed at the sight of it. As obnoxious as the mare could be, Rose knew for a fact that Minty cared about her very deeply. Still, she needed some time to herself. Something unexpected had happened after the two of them had crossed through the gateway and onto Earth, and Rose needed some peace and quiet to work her way through it. It was only a few minutes later when Minty approached her, walking three-legged and with the heavily laden tray of snacks balanced in her right forehoof. Rose shook her head as the Earth pony offered the tray to her. Well, I hope that whatever's on your mind hasn't made you forget anything, Minty said. They're about to close the gateway until next week. Rose grimaced. A little more time would have been nice, but it wasn't like she could do anything to convince the humans to leave the gateway open just for her sake. She forced a smile onto her face and tried to sound unworried. I'm pretty sure I packed everything I needed. Well, that's something I always admired about you, Rosie. Always so organized, never missing anything. There was something in Minty's expression that seemed far too amused. Rose cocked her head and studied the mare, trying to figure out what was going on. Do I have something on my face? She ventured to guess. Nope. Minty's gleefulness cranked up another couple of notches. Then. I didn't forget any of the paperwork, did I? You're on the wrong track, Minty replied. Think. More magical. Magical. Minty's voice was bubbling with laughter when she replied. You forgot to pick up a torque so you can cast magic, you ninny. Rose froze in place as icy panic instantly overwhelmed her. Her head snapped around towards the gateway, but it was already too late. She could feel it close. The magic that had been flooding into the earth from Equestria quickly began dwindling to nothing. I need a torque, Rose said, desperately prancing in place. There were a large number of fully charged torques packed into her personal luggage, but the humans had moved those to the room they'd be staying in tonight. Much too far away. The panic surged up, overwhelming her reason. Minty, I need a torque. The amusement faded from Minty's eyes, replaced with genuine concern. Hey, don't freak out about it. It's okay. I know the humans have some on this side. We can get you one. No, you don't understand. The last wisps of equestrian magic were already gone. Rose began burning through her personal reserves at a truly alarming rate. I need one now. Let me use yours. What? No. Minty backed away. We can get one for you later. It's not a big deal. That won't work. Rose's horn lit up, her aura reaching towards the torque around Minty's neck. Hey, quit it, Minty snapped, arching her neck to keep the torque in place. You're scaring me. I said we can get one for you. The attempt at telekinesis drained what little reserves Rose had left. Her spells failed, both the telekinesis and the other one. Green fire rippled down Rose's body, ripping away the illusion of the light pink unicorn mare with the lavender mane. For a tense moment, Minty just stared at her with huge, shocked eyes. No one else in the room seemed to have noticed, yet. If she could just get Minty's torque. The silver tray tumbled off of Minty's hoof, landing on the floor with a resounding clang and scattering fruit and cubes of cheese all over the floor. If that weren't enough to gain everyone's attention, Minty's horrified shriek would certainly have done so. All activity in the room ground to a complete stop. The changeling that had called itself Rose Quartz looked around with glowing blue eyes, noting that pretty much everyone was staring directly at it. The changeling forced a smile and addressed the room at large. Hi. Infiltrator **. What are you? The strongest of the voices asked. The infiltrator found itself momentarily at a loss. There was nothing in the caretaker's directives which indicated what it should do in this type of situation. The creature it had interfaced with, currently magically disguised as a unicorn, seemed to be overwhelmed as well, staring blankly at the wall in front of it while other creatures went about their business. Still, the directives required it to gather information. Communication could provide information. Thus resolved, the infiltrator replied. This one is named Infiltrator. Amusement rolled back towards it across the connected minds. Infiltrator. Indeed. That can be an apt description of ourselves, as well. I am called Chrysalis, or Queen, whichever you prefer. The infiltrator sent a thought back. There is no preference, only data. Curiosity came through the link. You are not native to my world, the Queen noted. And I doubt you are from the humans' world. What is your purpose? Gather data. Return home. Report data to caretaker. There was a long silence. What is the caretaker's purpose in gathering data? Eventual expulsion of foreign elements from home world. I see. There was another long silence. The infiltrator waited. It didn't occur to it to do anything else. A gift for you, then, the Queen said. Information began flooding the link, facts regarding biology, magic, geography and more, all relating to the world on the other side of the new portal. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. And when you return to your caretaker, tell him this, the humans are strong enough on their own, but they have an allegiance with the ponies. This makes both the ponies and the humans much stronger, and much more dangerous. If the caretaker wishes to aid me, I will aid him in return. I can drive a wedge between humans and ponies, but I will not do it for free. We must discuss a price. Tell him that, and then return with your answer. Message received and recorded, the infiltrator replied. Good. In that case, release my drone. It's already starting to draw attention to itself. Understood. The infiltrator released its hold on the drone that it had interfaced with. Chapter 15. Trials. After the gateway closed, the gateway office in the Canterlot Royal Gardens quickly returned to its normal quiet routine. The small building, just hours ago bustling with activity, now seemed unnaturally still to the few occupants remaining. The stained glass murals set into the top of the building were all dark, as the sun had set hours before. The small fire in the fireplace provided enough heat to drive the chill of early spring away. The light grey unicorn behind the reception desk, a stallion clerk by the name of Silver Scribe, hummed softly to himself as he sorted some papers with his magic. So much filing to do, especially with that wave of students that had gone through from both sides. The forms would be picked up by immigration control tomorrow, and he was determined to not let a single one through with any mistakes. At least, not with any mistakes that were his fault. The 2 royal guards assigned to this shift, a unicorn and a Pegasus, were relaxing in the lounge area while chatting softly with each other. Princess Celestia had ordered that the gateway office had to be staffed every hour of every day, even though it was only busy when the gateway was open. So far, everybody expected this to be another quiet night. That is, up until a familiar hum started up. Silver Scribe stood up from his desk, regarding the crystal spires that framed the gateway warily. The guards also stood, coming quickly to attention. The gateway to Earth snapped open. Silver braced himself. The agreement was that the gateway would stay closed during the week, with the exception of emergencies. I hope none of the students are hurt, he thought as he chewed worriedly on his lower lip. Silver's speculation was cut off as a human male in a charcoal grey suit stalked through the gateway, his face set into a stern scowl. He held up a picture ID. The unicorn gave it a close look, noting with some discomfort as the human's coat gaped open that he had one of those weapons in a shoulder holster. Marcus Weiss, head of security for Project Harmonix, the man said briskly by way of introduction. How can I help you, Mr. Weiss? Silver Scribe asked, unable to stop a nervous stomp of his hind hoof. You can let your princess know that we have a problem, the human said, scowling. There's a damned changeling on Earth. *******. Fascinating, Raka said as she stared raptly at the monitor. Please tell me I'll get to examine it. She was in an observation room, along with Marcus Weiss. Also there was Maggie Henson, who was vainly trying to smother yawns behind her hand. There were chairs, but none of the room's occupants were seated. Marcus, a stocky man in his 50s with close-cropped grey hair, snorted and shook his head. Not a chance. I'm not letting you or anyone else near that thing. He rubbed at the twisted scar along his jaw with an index finger as he scowled at the monitor. Not until we can be sure it isn't lying about being unable to manipulate our minds without magic. The changeling was stretched out on a bench in a small room that had initially been intended to hold potentially dangerous samples from foreign worlds. The room had been quickly cleared out, leaving only the cameras and the bench that was the room's sole concession to comfort. The only exit was a heavy steel door, outside which were a pair of armed Harmonix security guards. Raka let out a disappointed grunt and ran a delicate finger over the monitor. A whole new species. It looks almost insectile, but I really doubt that it is. And those eyes. They're beautiful. A derisive laugh from Marcus pulled Raka's attention away from the monitor. Creepy, you mean? Fascinating, Raka countered. The eyes glow, Mr. Weiss. Through what mechanism? And how does that not interfere with its vision? Do they even see the same way we do? Maggie sighed. I'm more interested in knowing how many others came through that we didn't catch, she said. Ah, Raka said, rocking back on her heels while rubbing a hand across the short hair on the back of her head. She hadn't thought of that. Finding out if our visitors are changeling or pony could be a problem. Not much of one. Marcus folded his arms over his chest. We just find each pony that came through and take away their talks for an hour or two. I'm more worried that any changelings that came through might disappear on us. We have to assume they can change into human form as well. Raka grimaced, adding, we just don't know enough about them as a species. They'll be outed eventually, Maggie said. We control the talks, after all. Without magic, the changelings can't maintain a transformation. Wrong, Raka replied. She scratched absently at a dry patch of skin on her arm as she watched the changeling on the monitor. We know they can metabolize love, and, according to what little information the equestrians have already given us, they can use that love for either sustenance or to power their magic. She offered a wan smile to the horrified Marcus. After all, their queen was able to eat enough love that she was able to go around with Celestia herself, and win. Damnation, Marcus said, staring off into space. So, assume that changelings can take the place of someone who is very well loved. You think they could maintain a disguise indefinitely? I honestly couldn't tell you, Raka replied. I think we have to assume it's possible, though. The two stood in silence for a long moment. Any chance we can get some equestrian experts over to help with this? Marcus grunted. I forwarded a request for some more information on changelings when I went through the gateway an hour ago. Hopefully Canterlot will pass along what they know. Raka watched the changeling for a while longer. A frown pulled down the corners of her mouth as she saw it shivering in its concrete cell. Any chance we could turn the heat up in there? Marcus turned and stared at her as if she'd asked him to make a balloon animal. What? The poor thing is shivering, she said, pointing at the monitor. No need to keep it miserable. No need to make it comfortable, either, Marcus pointed out. Raka scowled at the head of security, preparing a scathing reply. Maggie got there first. It's been docile enough since we found it, Marcus, Maggie said. Surely that deserves something of a reward. I'll get facilities to turn the heat up a little in there. They aren't to go in the room, Maggie, Marcus said sternly. I'm firm on that. They won't need to, Maggie replied. We've got heating elements running through the walls, and I can turn them up from here. She leaned forward and pressed the button for the intercom. The little changeling on the monitor jumped as a loud click echoed through its room, followed by Maggie's voice. You seem uncomfortable. Is the room too cold? The changeling looked around, finally setting eyes on one of the cameras. It nodded. You can talk, Maggie said with a hint of wry humor in her voice. I can hear you. This seemed to surprise the changeling, which drew its head back and blinked several times. Yes, I am cold, it said eventually. Okay, we're going to turn the heat up a little bit. If it gets too warm, let us know. Maggie released the intercom and leaned back. I don't like this, Marcus said. For all we know, it can do its mind control thing with just its voice. We shouldn't even talk to it until we get more information from Canterlot. Raka patted the man and smiled. You worry too much, Marcus. It's my job to worry, Marcus replied shortly. He turned to scowl once again at the changeling in the monitors. And, apparently, I didn't worry enough. ******. Contrary to what many ponies might believe, the majority of a princess time presiding over her court was not spent in the actual throne room. For the most part, individual petitioners would schedule appointments, which would take place in one of the many much more comfortable conference rooms, antechambers or reception rooms strewn about the palace. The door to one of these reception rooms flew open, revealing a richly dressed earth pony with a panicked expression on his face. The stallion fled, pursued by the thunderous scowl etched across Princess Luna's features. Odious little windbag, Luna growled. Her personal assistant for the day, on semi-permanent loan from Celestia's administrative staff, lit her horn and closed the door, though not before the stallion's ears flicked back upon hearing the princess statement. Clearing her throat, the dark-maned unicorn nodded towards the proposal left on the low table, surrounded by the devastated remains of various appetizers. Would you like me to read through his proposal and provide a summary, Princess? Yes, Raven. Thank you. Princess Luna's wings settled back to her sides as her breathing slowed. Her feathers ruffled and began to settle. I imagine I was a little harsh on him. As it wasn't quite a question, Raven had apparently decided to treat the statement as rhetorical. Instead of answering, she floated the thick stack of bound pages into her saddlebag. Still, if I hear one more pony state some variation on how Celestia would have done things differently. Luna considered for a moment. Do we still put ponies in the stocks, these days? Not typically, Princess, Raven replied smoothly. I believe the particular practice fell out of favor. Oh, I want to say 400 years ago. I see. Luna's scowl faded to a light frown as she regarded the secretary. So far, nothing she'd said or done had so much as ruffled Raven's implacable veneer of professionalism. Celestia had trained her well. Seems a tragedy. Again, Raven ignored the remark. I should have a summary ready by tomorrow morning, Princess. If you would be so kind, Raven, Luna replied. Pray, tell me what is next on the day's itinerary, which I swear gets longer every time I glance away from it. Well, Chancellor Fussbudget of the Ministry of Finance sends his regrets and asks that the budget review meeting be rescheduled until tomorrow. Then there's... Whatever Raven was about to say was cut off as the door was rudely slammed open. An armored unicorn came through a moment later, a grim look on his face. Luna recognized the dusky grey stallion immediately, of course. She had promoted him to be the captain of her personal Lunar Guard just a few days ago. His yellow eyes and black mane were a clear indication of the nagged pony blood in his veins. Somewhere in his ancestry could be found at least one of the rare bat-winged Pegasi. Captain Feldspar, Luna said evenly. Something urgent, I take it. Yes, Princess, the captain replied, his voice clipped and even. The humans have reopened the gateway. There is a changeling on Earth. Well, at least that takes care of the day's schedule, Luna thought wryly. Captured or free? Captured, the captain said. The humans are requesting aid in the form of both intelligence on changeling abilities, and in the form of magic capable of restraining it. Luna nodded, moving towards the door. I shall meet with them immediately. She stopped in front of the door, frowning. The captain hadn't moved. Captain, step aside. With all due respect, Feldspar drew himself up. No, Princess. The refusal shocked Luna enough that she took a step back. No. I can't allow you to go to Earth. Not while I'm your captain. Luna's eyes narrowed, though she managed to keep her ears from laying back. That can be arranged. I am not used to having my orders countermanded. Earth is too big of a security risk for a princess, Feldspar said. His voice was tight, but his eyes were steady. They could close the gateway behind you, and you would be entirely at their mercy. I'm no helpless filly, Luna said, her brows knitting and tail flicking as her irritation built. Very true, the captain replied. At least, not while your talk still has an active store of magic in it. Once that runs out, though, you would be helpless, and we would have no way of retrieving you. Luna opened her mouth, prepared to snap at him. What he said had a ring of truth to it, however. She was entirely reliant on humanity's newly acquired technology to ensure her safe return to Equestria. The humans are our allies, she reminded the captain. And I am grateful for that, Captain Feldspar replied. And I found much to be impressed about as I read up on their history. That doesn't change the nature of the risk. I understand your point, Captain. But we've never seen cause to distrust the humans yet. I believe I will be safe. It wouldn't have to be a deliberate act. An accident of some sort could leave you just as stranded as a deliberate action. He looked up at her, then, pleading clear in his eyes. Princess, if you were lost in the Griffin Kingdom, we could at least mount a rescue mission. As it is, we have no way of venturing to Earth. You must remain here, for the sake of all Equestria. Luna stared at him, considering. He had a valid point, she decided. Eventually, she nodded. Very well, would you be willing to go in my place? Captain Feldspar saluted. It would be my pleasure, Princess. Gather up any intelligence we have on the changelings. See if any experts from the college would like to go along to render advice. Yes, Princess. He saluted again and turned to leave. One last thing, Captain, Luna said, stopping him in his tracks. The captain looked back over his shoulder at her. Let Maggie Henson know that it is past time for the humans to keep their promise to build a harmonics facility in Equestria. We look forward to having one soon. Yes, Princess, Captain Feldspar repeated before trotting briskly away. Luna sighed and sat down. The first official day of governmental transition, and already she was dealing with changelings and obstinate captains. What else could possibly go wrong? Raven chose that moment to clear her throat. Well, now that that is out of the way, the next thing on the schedule is... Luna sighed and rubbed her temple with a hoof. Being in charge hadn't changed much in the 1,000 years she'd been gone. A princess she may be, but even she had to bow to the almighty schedule if she wished for the nation to run smoothly. Changeling *. The containment room was 20 feet beside with walls made of steel reinforced concrete poured 2 feet thick. The door was solid steel and was barred from the outside. The only furniture was in the form of a heavy steel bench bolted solidly into the concrete floor. Cameras in each corner covered every square inch of the room. At least the room was more comfortable, now that it was warmer. The changeling had managed to stop shivering, at least. It hadn't been fooled, though. Kindness was something other creatures only showed to changelings when they were disguised. Every changeling knew that. At some point, the changeling sensed a faint taste of magic and deduced that the gateway to Equestria had opened once again. The changeling absorbed as much magic as it could, though it refrained from using it. A disguise would be unlikely to fool the humans while it was so closely observed, after all, and would likely make the humans hostile. Time passed at an incredibly slow rate. There was nothing to do, nothing to see. And, though the gateway to Canterlot was once again open, no other changelings were attempting to make contact. With a shudder, the changeling realized that it had probably already been written off as dead. For the first time in its life, the changeling was utterly, completely alone. It was an interesting experience, and one that would have been almost enjoyable if it weren't for the sense of impending doom that it felt. The changeling had been told, in gruesome detail, what fates likely waited in store for it should the mission fail. Starvation was the least of its worries. In the deafening silence of the concrete room, it ran through every possible torture it faced. It had just begun contemplating live dissection when the door opened, startling it out of its macabre reflection. A mismatched pair of figures came through the open door, which shut the moment they were both through. The first figure was a human in a dark suit. The second was a unicorn of the Royal Guard in black lacquered armor. Emotions radiated from them both in a dense cloud, mixing and swirling, making it difficult to tell for certain which of them was feeling which emotions. Not that it mattered, really. The emotion with the greatest presence was the sour tang of fear mixed with loathing. Straighten up, the unicorn snapped. The changeling realized that it was cringing away from the pair of them and forced itself to a somewhat more upright position. I am Captain Feldspar, of Princess Luna's Guard, the unicorn said, his voice blunt. The changeling didn't need to be able to read emotions to sense the distaste coming off of him. Marcus Weiss, the human said in a similarly terse voice, head of security here at Harmonix. There was a pause, a moment of dreadful anticipation. The changeling waited through it, eventually becoming aware that they were waiting for something. Ah, hello. Nice to meet you, it ventured. No harm in being polite, it decided. The unicorn snorted. The human chuckled grimly. Do you have a name? Marcus asked. You mean one of my own? The changeling shook its head. No, sorry. Though, I do have a designation. The human and unicorn exchanged a glance. It was Captain Feldspar who spoke next. What do you mean? We can sense each other's thoughts, you see. We all know who we are, and where we stand in the hive, and our designations reflect that. The changeling considered for a moment. The closest I can come to a name in your language is, drone from the Southwest section, born 17 years ago, nose shake-shifting, telekinesis and basic office skills, on first assignment. The pair were staring at it blankly, and it shrugged. There's more to it, but it mostly relates to other skills I have. Marcus snorted and rolled his eyes. With names like that, conversations must take weeks. Not really. We communicate through concepts, not words. Forget that, Feldspar said. We'll just call you, changeling, then. Contempt spiked from the captain. The changeling sagged down on its bench and looked towards the floor. If you like. We have more important questions, Feldspar said, stepping forward. The first is, what happened to the real rose quartz? The changeling cocked its head and looked at them. Somewhere in the back of its mind, the idea took hold that it had something that these people wanted. It wasn't totally powerless. Perhaps it could gain favor through cooperation. Why should I tell you that? The changeling asked. Sensing the thunderous fury hiding under Feldspar's stony face, it quickly added, what I mean is, if I tell you, then there's nothing stopping you from torturing me to death, right? Marcus Weiss scowled at that. We're not going to torture you to death. The changeling's mind was racing. It sensed honesty coming from the human, and rage coming from the unicorn. It was impressive how Captain Feldspar was able to keep his face relatively calm when he was so very angry. For the first time since its capture, the changeling felt a glimmer of hope. So, you're saying I don't have a gruesome fate in store for me, even if I don't cooperate? The changeling asked. I'm saying, Marcus said, his voice slow and deliberate, that there is no advantage in you being contrary. Give us information and we'll treat you well. Give us nothing, you stay locked up here for the foreseeable future. As I slowly starve to death, the changeling pointed out. Not the best of fates, even if you're not going to torture me. I don't suppose you can eat regular food? Marcus asked. I can, yes. Pretty much anything, actually. We're omnivorous scavengers, but that just sustains our bodies. Without love to feed off of, our brains will eventually shut down and die. Well, how were you planning on staying fed on Earth in the first place? Marcus asked, folding his arms over his chest. I was hoping that Minty's compassion for rose quartz would be enough for me to get by. Also, humans seem to have some affection for pony kind, which may have helped. I have no idea if I can process human emotion, though. That's one of the things I was supposed to find out. Emotion isn't just emotion, Marcus asked, quirking an eyebrow. Maybe. I don't know. I just know we haven't tried it on humans, yet. The changeling considered that for a moment. As far as I know, at least. I'm just a drone, after all. I'm not told everything. It's not like I can find out now, anyway. You humans seem to be pretty horrified by me. I'll starve to death, here. The changeling said that in an even tone. It had known back when it had first been chosen for this mission that the odds were pretty high that it would end up dead. It had long since gotten used to that idea. The unicorn and human exchanged another look, making the changeling wonder if they had their own ability to communicate without language. We may be able to get you a trip back to Equestria, Feldspar said. May even be able to get you back to your hive. But you have to answer our questions, first. The lie would have been obvious even if the changeling weren't able to pick up on emotions. It broke into a grin. No need to lie to me, pony. I'll answer whatever questions you've got. Feldspar had a doubtful look on his face. Really? The changeling shifted on the chill steel bench. Don't worry about Rose Quartz. She's alive. We changelings never kill unless we have no other choice. Can't feed off of the dead, after all. It grinned again, relishing the feeling of horror coming off of the two of them. It made a nice change from the unicorn's disgust and the human's steadily growing knife-like curiosity. Feldspar's ears flicked back briefly and his eyes narrowed. Where is she? There's an old, abandoned bakery on the corner of 2nd Avenue and Sojourner Lane, the changeling said. There's a small nest of us there, usually 6 changelings guarding the place at any given time as the other members come and go. That's where we keep the changeling cleared its throat. The prisoners. Feldspar's ears flicked back as his mouth twisted into a frown. How many changelings total are in Canterlot? At least 10. Could be more, though. You're being extremely cooperative, Feldspar said, his eyes narrowing. Why, no loyalty for your queen? The changeling considered the question for a moment. Loyalty. I've heard of that, but I honestly don't know what it is. Changelings follow Chrysalis because she and her nymphs don't give us a choice. You ponies follow Celestia for no reason. She isn't in your head, or anything. You just do it. It shook its head. It makes no sense to me. Celestia treats us well and leads us wisely, Captain Feldspar said. His tone became more reverent as he added, as does Princess Luna. That is why they get our loyalty. The changeling grinned humorlessly. So, not exactly like a changeling hive, then. It chuckled bitterly. This is the first time in my life that I haven't had the queen or other changelings in my head. The silence is intense. So, no, I can't say I currently have loyalty for Chrysalis. It frowned. That will change the moment she contacts me again. So, I suggest you ask your questions quickly. What are Chrysali's plans for changelings on Earth? Marcus asked, interrupting whatever question Feldspar had been about to ask. And are there any other changelings who came through? The changeling shook its head. As far as I know, I was the first. The grand experiment. If I was able to stay disguised, only then would the others come through after me. They'd be disguised as some of the other ponies you'll find at the bakery. I don't know all of their identities, because I didn't need to. But if you figure it out, then you'll find your disguised ponies. It hesitated, then, please, don't hurt them, if you can help it. They have as little choice in this as I do. The questions went on for a while longer. The changeling answered them as best as it could. After the human and pony left, it went back to laying on its bench. Eventually, it managed to fall asleep. Luna *. The intersection of 2nd Avenue and Sojourner Lane was in a somewhat dilapidated part of town. This particular area had been hit with several stores going out of business at the same time, which had led to still more store closings as the location had become less desirable for shoppers. Currently, there were more ponies in the area than there had been for over a year, almost all of them either in the armor of the Royal Guard or of the City Watch. There was even a group of Sun Talon circling in the sky, a Griffin contingent of the Guard loyal to Celestia. The Griffin's superior vision was extremely useful when it came to spotting and tracking suspects. Luna watched, not interfering as the guards arrayed themselves outside of what the boarded-up remains of what had once been a bakery. Captain Feldspar had insisted on taking the lead. Once he was happy with how every pony was arrayed, he sent up a flare with his horn. Several groups of guards, mixed units made up of earth ponies and unicorns, breached the building on all sides, tearing open the door and blasting through the boarded-up windows. Then came the waiting. The command post was on top of another abandoned building a short distance from the bakery. The roof was flat, which had allowed a large number of command staff to congregate and observe the action through binoculars. Luna's hoof pawed restlessly against the roof as she waited for word, heart thudding as she stared at the blank, gaping windows. It felt like hours, but truthfully it was only minutes later when a sergeant of the City Watch exited and shot up a flare of his own, followed quickly by a second. The first burst a bright green, indicating mission completion. The second burst yellow, and Luna's heart clenched. Yellow meant medic needed. It's probably for the civilian prisoners, Captain Feldspar said softly next to her. Here comes a flyer now. Luna noted the Pegasus flying quickly from the building and couldn't help but try and read his expression. He seemed excited, but not upset, much to her relief. The Pegasus guard landed and saluted. Report, Feldspar said. Sir. No injuries to report. 5 changelings were found and captured. 17 civilians were discovered in the basement, wrapped in some kind of cocoons. The civilians seem to be alive but unconscious. Medical personnel are on site and are working to revive them. Very good. Dismissed, Captain Feldspar said. He turned to Luna. Princess, 17 civilians indicates that this incursion may be greater in scope than anticipated. We should do a building-by-building sweep to look for any further changeling infestation. Do it, Luna said, reeling from the report. 17 civilians captured, held prisoner in Canterlot, right under the nose of both Celestia and herself. Captain Feldspar saluted and began snapping out orders. Luna watched as the guards went door to door quickly and efficiently. Any civilians discovered were quickly scanned by unicorn guards to make certain they weren't changelings in disguise. It was an hour later when the first of the civilian victims were brought up from the bakery's basement. Some of them were walking, while others were carried out on stretchers. Luna felt her chest tighten in anger at the sight. Captain, I would like a report on the status of the victims. Yes, Princess, Feldspar replied with a salute. It took a few minutes for the captain to round up a medic with enough free time to visit and report. The medic, a misty grey unicorn mare with a heart crossed with a bandage for a cutie mark, introduced herself as Caring Heart. She was visibly nervous about her unexpected introduction to royalty, and yet her report was crisply and efficiently delivered. All of the prisoners were kept in some sort of cocoon, Caring Heart reported. They were kept suspended in an unknown substance. We believe this substance has the dual purpose of keeping them alive while also sedating them. We wanted to make sure every pony was stable before we began moving them. I see. Luna frowned down at the group being escorted out of the building. And the reason why some of them are walking and others being carried. Are there complications? There may be, Caring Heart replied, casting a worried look at the ponies below. Perhaps some ponies were exposed longer, or the sedation is affecting some ponies. For the most part, it looks like it is the older ponies who are the hardest hit. Very good, Luna said. Keep an eye on them and make sure they have everything they need. If there is anything I can. A loud cry from street level got Luna's attention. A light brown earth pony mare with a green mane was barreling past the guards, heading towards one of the recovered civilians in particular. Rosie, the mare called as she ran. Her target, a light pink unicorn, looked up blearily just in time to be tackle-hugged by the earth pony, who immediately began fussing over her. Luna allowed herself a smile at the sight. This, Rosie, had no doubt been through a terrible ordeal, but hopefully a good friendship would see her through the worst of it. Names and addresses had already been gathered from the civilians, with squads of guards going off to find the changelings who had been impersonating them. Luna got the list as soon as it was compiled and noted, with a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach, just how many of them were on government staff. The only small grace was that they were all in low-level positions. Luna issued a few orders, and the newly freed ponies were all brought to the palace. Those that needed it would get the best medical care available, while the others would be given food and drink before being sent on their way home with a guard escort. The sun was nearly down by the time Captain Feldspar reported back. He snapped off a quick salute. No further changeling activity discovered, Princess. Very well. Luna looked around, noting that the various guardsponies were already beginning to leave the area. I shall return to the palace. Meet me there when you return. Captain Feldspar nodded. Luna wasted no more time, launching herself into the air. She had much to discuss with her sister, and then it would be time to begin screening Dreamguard candidates. Aaron***. It wasn't pleasant, pulling a burlap sack off of a cart with your teeth. Erin was pretty sure she'd never get the taste of it out of her mouth. With a flick of her head, she tossed the bag of seed up on top of the 2 others she already had on her back. She'd had a lot of practice with that, recently. Every day since she'd come back from Cloudsdale, Erin had joined the Apple family on their farm, helping them with their work in exchange for training in Earth Pony magic. The strangest part of the training had been when Applejack had given Erin her own apple tree sapling and then insisted that she come up with a name for it. Erin had considered it for a while before deciding on Pomona. Applejack had been confused by the name until Erin had explained its origins as the name of the Roman goddess of orchards. Besides, the only other name she could think of for a tree had been Groot. Erin's first task of each day had been to check on the tree, watering it and looking it over for signs of disease or damage. This didn't typically take very long, as Erin had no idea what to look for. Then Erin went and did whatever chores Applejack assigned to her. Today, that meant stacking bags of seed on the edge of the freshly plowed field where they would soon be planted. After dropping the last bag on the stack, Erin took a quick breather, looking at the now empty cart with a quiet satisfaction. The hard work had left her exhausted and filthy at the end of every day, but Erin couldn't find it in her to complain. The first reason for that was because her physical abilities were coming along nicely. Her morning runs were getting easier, for one thing, and, though each day left her just as tired as the day before, she was accomplishing so much more in the same amount of time. She still wasn't back up to where she was when she first arrived in Ponyville, but she was getting closer, which was a very nice feeling. The second reason that Erin didn't mind working so hard was brought to mind by the clang of the Apple family's dinner bell. Technically, the bell was a triangle, but Erin wasn't going to argue the point when there was free food involved. She grinned and broke into a run, heading towards the source of the sound, the Apple family farmhouse. With any luck, one of these days she'd be able to fly the distance, rather than running. Thoughts of flying reminded her of Rainbow's lessons on air sculpting. On a whim, Erin concentrated on the air in front of her, willing it to get thin, to reduce air resistance. The result was immediate, causing her to stumble a half step forward as the minute but steady pressure of the wind on her chest all but vanished. Erin recovered quickly. Then, with a grin, she kicked up her heels and poured on the speed, running faster than she had since she'd returned to Equestria. Sadly, her run didn't last long, her newfound endurance seemingly abandoning her after a mere minute or so. Panting, Erin staggered to a halt and leaned against the fence along the side of the road. What the heck? Erin gasped. A stitch had formed in her side, and she spent a few painful moments rubbing at her ribs with a hoof, trying to make the knot of pain go away. She shoved herself upright with a grimace and started walking down the road once again. Erin opted to continue walking, rather than trying to run anymore. Whatever it was that had sapped her strength had her a little worried. I hope I'm not getting sick, she thought. That's all I need. The smell of lunch greeted her as she approached the Apple family's front door. Breaking into an eager grin, Erin trotted the rest of the way, knocking lightly on the front door. Apple Bloom opened it a moment later. She hadn't put her traditional ribbon in her mane, yet. In fact, with her mane all snarled and sticking out in all directions, it looked like she hadn't brushed it, either. Hey, Erin. Just in time for lunch, like usual. Erin smirked at Apple Bloom's cheeky grin. Hey, free food for free labor. Theme's the rules, kiddo. Apple Bloom stood aside and Erin walked in, mussing up the filly's mane even further with a hoof as she did so. Apple Bloom stuck out her tongue and blew a raspberry before breaking out into giggles. Erin grinned at the filly as she followed her nose to the dining area, where a simple but wholesome lunch was laid out. On Earth, working 4 to 6 hours on a farm for no more than 2 meals would have been seen as a bad deal. But since those meals were Apple family meals, Erin considered herself to be coming out on top in this particular arrangement. Erin pulled up a chair on the same side of the table as Apple Bloom, with Applejack sitting across from them. Granny Smith was bringing the last of the food out, and Macintosh hadn't arrived yet. You get all them bags stacked up, Erin? AJ asked her. Yup, Erin replied as she eyed the spread on the table before her. Salad, a thick stew, steamed veggies smothered in butter, fried squash with brown sugar, and so much more. It all smelled wonderful. You brought the cart back with ya, then? Applejack asked with a knowing grin. Erin felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. She looked up sheepishly back at AJ. Yeah, I forgot that. She hunched down into her chair a little bit. Sorry, I'll go and get it before heading home. No worries, Sugar Cube. The door opened, then, sparing Erin any further embarrassment, Macintosh Apple walked in, his coat and mane damp. He took a seat next to Applejack and across from Apple Bloom. Now, why in tarnation are you all wet, Big Mac? AJ asked, favoring her brother with a frown. Macintosh shrugged, though his cheeks darkened a little bit. He was probably out back, washing himself off with the garden hose again, the younger Apple sister said. She started snickering and added, he only does that when we've got company for lunch. Erin sighed. Apple Bloom seemed set on matchmaking, taking every opportunity she could to get Macintosh alone with her. Failing that, she would needle her big brother about it at every opportunity. Applejack would sometimes join in, while the eldest of the Apple siblings sat there, stoically ignoring them. Erin decided to try and derail the teasing before it got going. Speaking of cleaning up for company, Apple Bloom, did you happen to brush your mane this morning? Or were you just letting a goat chew on it? Apple Bloom's sour grimace and extended tongue brought a snort of laughter from Applejack, followed by a critical examination. She's got a point, Bloom, AJ said to her sister. Just 'cause you got the day off of school, that's no reason to leave your mane in such a state. Apple Bloom muttered peevishly as she slouched down in her chair. Macintosh caught Erin's eye and gave her a quick nod as he flashed a grateful smile. Fortunately, this went unnoticed by his sisters, or a new round of teasing would likely have started up. Granny joined them a moment later, putting down a pitcher of iced tea before taking her usual spot at the head of the table. The next few minutes passed in relative silence as every pony loaded up their plates. Once they all had enough, at least for a first course, conversation started up once again. So, there's no school today? Erin asked Apple Bloom. Apple Bloom beamed and nodded, whatever lingering resentment the filly might have had towards Erin for calling out her messy mane vanishing in the pure joy of a school-less spring day. Yup, it's founding day. Founding day. The day Ponyville was founded, Applejack said. No school, some businesses are closed, and ponies that have to work get paid double. It's also the start of the Ponyville Days Festival. Old tradition. Granny Smith snorted at that. Ain't all that old. So, does that mean I get to eat twice as much as usual? Erin asked, eyes twinkling. Applejack snorted a laugh. Nah, but I reckon we can give you some to take home, if you like. I wouldn't say no to that, Erin said. The food is really great, Granny Smith. The old mare grinned at that. Ya can just call me, Granny, young'un. And thank ya kindly. Apple Bloom turned to look at Erin. Speaking of school, Miss cheerily asked me yesterday if you could stop by and talk to her. Oh. Did she say why? We've been talking a bit about humans, and such. Apple Bloom shrugged. She probably wants you to talk about humans in front of the class. Oh. Erin considered that for a moment. Yeah, I don't see why not. I have to ask my boss for time off, though. She shot a grin at Applejack. What do you say, boss? AJ smirked and drawled, well, typically I would like more notice from my farmhoos before they take time off. But, considering it's for the young'uns, I guess I can't say, no. Thanks, Applejack. Erin shot her a smile that turned down into a frown. Of course, now I have to figure out what I'm going to talk about. Shouldn't be too hard, Applejack replied. Just talk about yourself, you know, how you grew up, and stuff like that. Erin considered that while chewing on a hot, buttered roll. She nodded, swallowing. Yeah, that would work. Speaking of stuff happening on Earth, have you heard anything new from Twilight about the changelings? Erin grimaced and shook her head. No, just the letter that we got from her yesterday. Twilight had sent out 6 letters to her friends, each of which had been nearly identical. Erin's had been personally delivered by Dixie on Tuesday. It had been nice to get a more rational view of events than what had been printed in the papers, which were reporting that there were anywhere from hundreds to thousands of changelings, who were either kidnapping or viciously attacking ponies in the heart of Equestria's capital city. Naturally, that news had caused considerable panic in the small town until the Ministry of Public Relations released their official statement that it had only been a small cell, all of whom had already been captured. You think there's lots of changelings on Earth? Apple Bloom asked. Apple Bloom. AJ scolded. The filly drew back defensively. What? No fear-mongering at the table. But that's what the papers were saying. It was an invasion. There was only one changeling, according to Twilight, Erin replied. Please, let there have been only one, she thought. Applejack harumphed. Can't believe everything you read in the papers, Apple Bloom. Why not? The filly cocked her head and frowned up at her older sister. 'Cause they ain't paid to print the truth, they're paid to sell papers, Applejack said with a sour grimace. Don't believe nothing you read until you check it. That's another thing Earth and Equestria have in common, Erin said. AJ chuckled and the tension left the table. The conversation went back to farming topics, primarily concerning plans for the coming months which Erin found herself tuning out. She wasn't planning on working the full spring and summer at the farm. The conversations wrapped up around the same time as the meal did, and every pony got back to their hooves while Apple Bloom and Granny cleared the table. In response to a query from Applejack, McIntosh announced his intention to get started on planting the northeast field. Oh, that's where I left the cart, Erin said. I'll go with you. McIntosh considered that for a moment, then nodded. Yup. Erin followed him out, while Applejack went off to do whatever it was she was planning on doing that afternoon. The stallion's longer legs made it necessary for Erin to break into the occasional trot to keep up with him. All the while, she was staring at the road while considering a way to delicately bring up a fairly touchy topic she'd been thinking about for the last few days. Something on your mind, Sunflower? McIntosh asked. Somewhere along the way, he'd picked a grass stalk and stuck it in his mouth. No, well, yes. How do you feel about foals? Erin could have kicked herself the moment the words were out of her mouth. Considering their past, that was the worst way she could have phrased the question. That wasn't delicate at all, you idiot, she scolded herself. McIntosh's reaction seemed to back up her assessment. The poor stallion stumbled and nearly fell before freezing, wide-eyed, in the middle of the road. The stalk of grass dangled from his lower lip and his coat was a much darker red than usual as he uttered weak little sounds. No. I mean, Erin groaned and stomped a hoof. What I meant to say was, would you consider dating a mare who already has a foal? McIntosh shook his head. What? Well, I don't mean to interfere, and I always hated it when a friend tried to hook me up with someone else, but, well, let's say I know a mare who might be interested in going out with you, but she has a foal. Would that bother you? For a minute or so, McIntosh's only reaction was to blink at her in confusion. A mare, who? Erin shook her head. Nope, not going to give you a name unless you're interested. It would spare every pony a lot of embarrassment if you're not interested. Erin was flushing a pretty deep scarlet, herself. She bungled this pretty badly already. It's just, I don't know how it is for ponies, but among humans, having a kid can be a deal breaker for a lot of males your age. McIntosh had recovered most of his composure by this point. At Erin's last statement, he recovered the rest of it, straightening himself with a frown. Can be for some stallions, too. Always thought that was short-sighted of M. So you'd be okay with it? McIntosh considered that for a moment. Depends, really. It's different for me than most. Erin tilted her head and frowned in confusion. What do you mean? Any pony I end up with is gonna have to live here on the farm. Ain't many ponies willing to give up whatever life they got to do that. I reckon that's especially true of a mare with a foal. Yeah. The two of them started walking again. Once again, Erin found herself deep in thought. Macintosh was either considerate enough to let Erin think things through, or he was deep in thought himself, because he didn't utter a peep until they got to the cart. You reckon you can give me a name, now? Macintosh asked. Erin offered up a weak smile as she strapped herself into the cart's harness. Tell you what, let me talk to her tonight, and I'll let you know if she's actually interested in dating you or if she just finds you attractive. Macintosh blushed again and looked away. Up. Giggling, Erin turned the cart towards the farmhouse. See you tomorrow, Macintosh, she said. See you tomorrow, Sunflower, came the reply. Erin trotted off, leaving the stallion to his work. Applejack was waiting for her at the barn, leaning against the wall with her hat down low over her eyes. She waved at Erin, who smiled and broke into a trot. Hey, Applejack. What's up? You know, Applejack drawled, if I didn't know better, I'd say Big Mac still has a bit of a crush on ya. Erin blushed as she shrugged out of the harness. We talked about it, Applejack. We're just friends. You sure about that? Applejack asked, grinning. Pretty sure. Why? Applejack chuckled as she kicked the barn door open with a hind hoof while still leaning against the wall. Cause the darned fool went to go plant the field and left the seed drill behind, she said, nodding her head at the device. It looked a little bit like a comb suspended between two wheels. Erin gaped at it. Oh, is that what that is? Applejack started laughing. Big Lug probably realized it by now and is just waiting for a bit to make sure you ain't around when he comes back to get it. The conversation, following so closely on Erin's earlier, how do you feel about foals? Blunder, had her flushing a deep red. Well, maybe he just forgot. Doesn't have to be because of me, does it? Applejack only laughed harder, dropping to the dirt and wheezing for air. It's not that funny, Applejack. Erin was getting ready to leave in a huff when AJ lifted a shaky foreleg and pointed back the way she'd come. Erin turned to look, spotting a brief glimpse of deep red that was suddenly, and, unfortunately, incompletely, obscured by the trunk of an apple tree. She sighed, rubbing her forehead with a hoof while Applejack whooped it up. Can, still, see, Applejack managed before breaking into fresh gales of laughter. I'm going home, Erin said, rolling her eyes. Try not to tease him too badly, okay? As she trotted away, accompanied by AJ's laughter and the memory of a stallion trying to hide behind the woefully inadequate cover of a tree trunk, Erin found herself desperately hoping that Ditsy had been serious about being interested in Macintosh. Hopefully, if he started dating some pony else, his family would stop torturing the two of them every chance they got. Trixie *. Trixie was second-guessing herself, and not for the first time. The road back to civilization had been hard, though things definitely perked up once she managed to reach a town with a train station. Then there was the application process itself, which had mostly involved standing around with a mob of ponies all hoping for the same thing, learning dream magic from a princess. One of the first things she found out was that palace staff had very little patience for grandiose statements of awe-inspiring ability, and even less for referring to oneself in the third person. As a result, Trixie was now forced to temper her language to match the ordinary ponies around her. That, coupled with her lack of customary cape and hat, left her feeling out of sorts and irritable. The daily scans to make sure none of them were changelings hadn't helped to improve her mood, even when the guards had found 2 changelings among the applicants on the first day. 2 days later, they were still scanning all the applicants. While Trixie could certainly understand the need, having unfamiliar ponies casting spells on her was extremely unnerving. Many of the ponies who had applied were the down-and-out dregs that Trixie had been expecting. Ponies without work who were hoping for a job, any job. Of those that looked somewhat better off, most of those were ponies young enough to just barely be out of school, with the rest being curiosity seekers. A few upper-class ponies stood in their own small groups, sneering down their muzzles at every pony else in sight. Trixie might have said something to them about that, but she was far too aware that her current appearance fit in best with the dregs, rather than the aristocrats. That Trixie wasn't actually down on her luck wasn't immediately apparent, thanks in large part to her dry and frazzled mane and chipped hooves. Even though she'd stopped by a spa before arriving at the castle to apply, there was only so much that could be done to improve the appearance of a mare who had spent so much time on the road. It would take days of pampering to even begin to get the sheen and bounce back in her mane. So it was that Trixie spent most of each day by herself, going through round after round of interviews with steadily high levels of palace administration. The group she had applied with dwindled rapidly along the way. The ponies with major crimes in their pasts were the first to go. The remaining applicants were told very bluntly that being in the Dream Guard would be a lot of work and would require serious dedication, making most of those who were here just for a lark or who thought this would be an easy job the next to be sorted out. Nearly all of the nobles and upper-class ponies left at that time, as did many of the curious and a few of the students. After every round of interviews, the remaining applicants were moved to a different, smaller room. What was left now were those truly determined to get a position in the Dream Guard. And, as nobody had any idea how many positions were open, every pony in the group had to be viewed as a rival. Trixie maintained an air of aloofness, keeping herself apart from it all. That didn't stop her from analyzing every pony she saw, looking for weaknesses. For example, the plain-looking earth pony mare, barely more than a filly, who kept looking around nervously, a few well-chosen words in her twitching little ear, and she might just decide that all of this wasn't worth the stress. May I have your attention, please? Trixie broke off her surreptitious study of her fellow applicants to look at the unicorn mare who had just walked into the room. Her black mane and tail were both done up in no-nonsense buns. She was levitating a clipboard in front of her. Good evening, every pony. My name is Raven, and I am one of Princess Luna's personal assistants. A murmur of excitement ran through the remaining score or so of applicants. The corners of Raven's mouth curved up in what was very nearly a smile. My congratulations to you all. You've all passed the preliminary interviews, and are on the short list as candidates for the Dream Guard. This news was met by an excited shout by a few of the rougher-looking ponies, most of whom had the grace to look embarrassed when Raven sent a withering glare their way. Yes. All that remains now is to determine if you have the actual ability to use dream magic. If you are capable, then you will be accepted as a provisional member of the Dream Guard. Trixie was grinning at this point, as were the other ponies in the room. She had made it. She was in. Well, assuming that she could wield dream magic. But Trixie wasn't worried about that. After all, it was practically a foregone conclusion that she could. Raven allowed herself a tight smile at the applicant's excitement. All right, settle down, every pony. First, I'd like to do a quick roll call. Raise your hoof and say, here, when I call your name. Trixie did her best to remember the names as they were called off. After all, these were potentially her fellow Dreamguard. The tiny earth pony mare she'd noted from before shyly raised her hoof when Raven read out the name, Smidgen, which Trixie thought was an extremely odd name. Who names their filly Smidgen? No wonder the poor thing looked nervous all the time. A small bubble of guilt welled up as Trixie remembered her thoughts of sabotaging the poor mare's confidence. Trixie Lulamoon. Raven called. Here. Trixie called while raising her hoof. Raven nodded, made a check mark on her clipboard, and continued calling names. Trixie took that opportunity to sidle up next to the unfortunately named Smidgen, who cast a nervous glance at her before staring at her hooves. Smidgen, is it? Trixie asked softly, pitching her voice low. Smidgen nodded and flashed an apprehensive smile before looking back at the floor. You can relax, Smidgen. Trixie smiled confidently at the trembling earth pony. You made it in. Not yet, Smidgen replied in a whisper. Trixie had to strain to hear her. We still have that test. I am confident you'll pass it with flying colors, Trixie replied staunchly. And, if there's any way I can help you pass, I will. Smidgen looked shocked at the offer for a moment before a joyful smile broke out across her face. The smile transformed her plain features into something more, transforming her face into something quite lovely. Thank you, Smidgen whispered. Think nothing of it, Trixie replied, feeling oddly good about herself. She looked about, noting that Raven had finished checking off names and was now leading every pony out of the room. Ah, it looks like we're being moved to yet another room. Hopefully, the next one won't be much smaller. They'll be trying to fit us all into a closet, at this rate. Smidgen giggled at that. Together, the two of them joined the others and moved into the hallway. The room they were led into was a departure from the previous trend, being much larger than the last one. The first thing Trixie noticed was the incredibly high, vaulted ceiling. Chandeliers of delicate crystal and gold glowed with enchanted light, bathing the room with soft illumination. The walls were painted a dark red, rich and vibrant, the perfect complement to the gleaming wood floor, which was tiled in alternating light and dark stain like a chessboard. All around the large room were scattered cushions and couches. There seemed to be no organization involved at all, other than keeping at least a few feet of space between each piece of furniture. As the ponies walked in, their hoofsteps echoed around the enormous room. It was almost enough to make Trixie feel small. Almost. Further examination of the room was cut off instantly when Trixie saw who was waiting for them. Twilight Sparkle, the unicorn that had been haunting her for months now, was laying on her belly on a low couch. Her eyes were closed and, if it weren't for her upright posture, Trixie could have sworn she was asleep. Next to her, Smidgen gasped. Trixie looked down at the little mare to see that she was staring into a different corner of the room. Trixie followed her gaze, noting a little belatedly that Twilight Sparkle wasn't the only pony who had been waiting for them. Princess Luna was sitting on her hindquarters amidst a pile of cushions. Her dark blue coat shone softly in the light, her flowing ethereal mane alight with captured starlight. A polite smile graced her features as she nodded to the prospective Dreamguard who were entering the room. Welcome, one and all, Luna said once the door clicked shut behind them. For the final portion of your application to the Dreamguard, there is but one final test. Do not worry, should you fail here today. I do not expect that many of you shall pass on your first attempt, after all. You will be given more chances, should you need them. Please, find a place to lie down, and make yourselves as comfortable as you can. Twilight Sparkle had cracked her eyes open once Luna had started speaking. She glanced at the students, and Trixie was certain her eyes widened a fraction when they met her own. Good, she remembers me, Trixie thought with quiet satisfaction. Trixie didn't bother to look around, simply finding the closest pile of cushions and lowering herself into them. Smidgen found another set of cushions nearby and sunk into them, looking even tinier by comparison once she was fully settled. Twilight had already closed her eyes once again by the time Princess Luna began talking. Trixie tore her gaze away to look once more at the Princess of the Night. The point of today's lesson is to try and guide your mind to the place directly between reality and the world of dreams, Luna said. This is the threshold, what we used to call the Gate of Dreams. Should you succeed, I will meet you there. Now, what you need to do is very simple. Simply begin relaxing your mind, calming your thoughts. I shall give you some advice on how to accomplish this. Princess Luna continued talking, but Trixie wasn't able to pay much attention. Instead, her focus was on Twilight. The mare was sitting there, all peaceful and quiet, ignoring Trixie, as if it weren't her fault that Trixie had spent months trying to salvage a shattered reputation before finally giving in and looking for an artifact that would give her power, that would allow her to show Twilight, no, to show every pony, that Trixie was no joke. And she was just sitting there, all placid and peaceful, as if she didn't even know or care what she'd done to Trixie. As if, is something troubling you? A gentle voice asked to her right. Trixie squeaked and jumped slightly. She looked over to see a pair of long, dark legs, which she followed up until she met Princess Luna's eyes. The princess was regarding her with a calm but concerned expression. No, thank you, Your Majesty. Trixie is quite well. She bit her lip, regretting the slip into third person, but Luna either didn't notice or didn't care. Instead, the princess simply nodded. Try to relax. Clear your mind of distractions and try to achieve a state of perfect calm. Trixie almost snorted at the suggestion, with her rival only a stone's throw away. Not that there were any stones to throw, only cushions, which Trixie refused to even consider throwing as it was obviously beneath her dignity, no matter how funny the thought of Twilight Sparkle receiving a face full of fabric was. Instead, she schooled her expression to stillness and nodded. I will try my best, princess, she said. There was only one reason why Twilight Sparkle would be here in this place. Obviously, she was trying out for the Dreamguard as well. As Celestia's student, it made a certain amount of sense, but it was so unfair. How could one unicorn have so many advantages while Trixie had to scrape and work her tail off to achieve any amount of progress? Just then, Twilight Sparkle grimaced and adjusted herself. Something about her expression when she did so. Was it disappointment? Frustration? Elation burst inside Trixie's chest when the realization hit her. Twilight was a student, just like she was. And, from the looks of it, she was still struggling with this first part, the relaxation. The thought hit her almost like a physical blow. She could still win. She followed what little snippets of Luna's advice that she remembered. She concentrated on her breathing. She tried relaxing. Minutes ticked by, and yet Trixie still found herself unable to relax. The other student's breathing was becoming synchronized, possibly due to some latent herd instinct. The sound of it put Trixie in mind of the many nights she'd spent in her wagon, traveling from one town to the next. After the sun went down, after she put out her last candle, the only sound was the creaking of insects and the wind sighing in the trees. She'd spent most of the last several years like that. It was lonely, but it was a serene sort of lonely. The thought of the trees swaying always reminded her of the sea, her little wagon like an island in the night. Noppany around for miles, noppany to disturb her. She lost herself in the memory of these feelings, stilling all other thoughts in her mind. The other students, even Twilight Sparkle, all fell away. The sensation of the cushions beneath her had long since faded. All that was left was Trixie, alone in her wagon, listening to the sound of the wind in the trees. And, shortly thereafter, even that was gone. Well, this is a pleasant surprise, a soft voice said. Trixie's eyes snapped open. Much to her amazement, she found that she was no longer in the classroom. Instead, she was apparently standing on nothing, with a featureless grey stretching away from her on all sides. The voice had come from behind her. Trixie wasn't sure if she turned, or if the world somehow revolved around her. Either way, Princess Luna came into view, wearing a pleased smile. I am most impressed. I confess, I wasn't expecting any pony to reach this place tonight. Trixie looked around. She had a vague feeling that she should be frightened to find herself suspended in the middle of grey nothingness, but it was hard to conjure the emotion. Where are we, Princess? Princess Luna's smile beamed like moonlight. Why, we're on the threshold of the dream realms, of course. Welcome, I made it. Trixie gaped up at the princess for a moment before squealing with delight. If her hooves had been on solid ground, she would have hopped into the air. As it was, her legs just paddled at the nothingness around her. I made it. You did indeed, my little pony, Princess Luna said. Her tone was grave, but she was smiling still. And soon, your true training will begin. Tilde tilde asterisk tilde tilde. Trixie kicked her hooves idly while she hummed an aimless tune. As fascinated as she had been at first, there is only so much time a pony can remain excited while suspended in the middle of the featureless grey void that is the threshold of the dream realms. Some distance away, Princess Luna was standing perfectly still, a look of calm serenity on her features. She'd said something about checking on the others, a few minutes earlier, ending their impromptu question and answer session. Trixie had learned a little about the different levels of the dream realms, with the promise of more instruction to come. After an unknown amount of time, Princess Luna shifted and opened her eyes. Alas, she said, it seems my early optimism at such a quick initial success was unfounded. It seems as if you will be the only one joining me tonight. I do believe that we can call an end, for now. If you please, concentrate on returning to wakefulness. Trixie rubbed her forehooves together and looked away. Something concerns you. Well, Princess, with a grimace, Trixie let spill what had been bothering her. What if, and I'm not saying it would happen, mind you, but what if I can't get back here? Luna smiled kindly as she walked over to where Trixie hung suspended on nothing. Have no fear, my dream guard. Each time you come here, you will find the return to be easier. Soon, it will be as simple to you as closing your eyes. The rapid fluttering of Trixie's heart abated somewhat. She managed a nervous smile back at Luna. All right, Princess. Trixie concentrated. A rushing feeling filled her senses, then nothing. This lasted for a long moment before all of her senses came flooding back, and she realized three things in quick order. The first thing she noticed was that the real world was loud compared to the threshold, even with Noppany making much noise. Just the movement of the air and the occasional shift or cough from other ponies seemed to be an incredible din. Second, her body had acquired a number of small cramps, itches and other such annoyances. Third, she badly needed to use the little filly's room. I think that's enough for this evening, every pony, Luna called. A series of groans and frustrated mumbles answered her, causing her to raise a hoof. Worry not, you shall be given many further opportunities to qualify for a position. As we go on, we will attempt to hone in on a process that will allow you to achieve the proper state. Perhaps music shall work for some of you. A playful gleam entered the princess' eye as she looked towards Twilight Sparkle, who was standing and beginning to stretch out her legs. Though, I know it doesn't work for every pony. Twilight's face twisted as if she'd bitten into a lemon, and Trixie's heart sung a little song. One corner of her mouth lifted up in a not-quite sneer as she looked across the room at her dejected rival. What happened next made her victory even more sweet. I am pleased to announce that one of your number has passed initiation. Every pony, please give a warm welcome to the first pony to enter the Dream Guard in over a millennium, Trixie Lulamoon. The applause was half-hearted and accompanied by some jealous grumbling. Nevertheless, Trixie drank it up like it was the sweetest nectar, not even bothering to keep the smug grin off of her face. A repast has been prepared for you, Luna said as she swept gracefully towards the door. Castle servants will be present shortly to show you all to the dining hall. For those of you staying in the castle, you will be shown to your rooms after dinner is done. For now, I have other duties to attend to, and I shall see you all tomorrow. With that, Luna left. Trixie had to restrain the urge to trot after her and demand, politely, of course, to know what would happen next. Food, she decided, would not be unwelcome. Besides, a palace servant would likely find her to tell her where and when the princess needed her. For now, she had other things to do. She rose to her hooves and began picking her way between the cushions. Half-formed boasts and gloats were forming in her mind as she approached her nemesis, the mare who had shown her up and humiliated her. The cause of all her suffering, the reason for her homelessness. Twilight Sparkle. Trixie had dreamed of this moment. As her shadow fell across the sitting mare, Twilight blinked and looked up at her. Trixie cleared her throat and opened her mouth, preparing the first of many barbed statements designed to lance into her rival's heart. Oh, hi Trixie, Twilight said, smiling as she stood up. It's good to see you again. Every carefully prepared jab and every stinging comment, all of it spun away as Trixie's brain whirled with confusion. It is, she blurted. Oh, yes, I was pretty worried about you after you left Ponyville. You were. Twilight nodded, her face taking on a somber expression. I was honestly expecting you to come back to town sometime later that night. I was really concerned when I checked the next day and none of the hotels or inns said you'd stayed there. I mean, with your wagon smashed and everything, that meant you had to sleep outside, right? Trixie had actually spent the first night crying tears of loss and shame while huddled under the dubious shelter of an apple tree. At least the tree had been kind enough to provide her with breakfast the following morning. Oh, that reminds me. Her dreaded rival smiled a chipper and hateful smile. I salvaged what I could from your wagon. It's in storage in the basement of the Ponyville library. But, embarrassed resentment began heating up in Trixie's chest. She'd practiced this encounter in her mind every night for months. This was not the way this conversation was supposed to go. I even cast a repair spell on whatever I could identify, Twilight continued, blithely oblivious to the distress she was causing Trixie. I mean, some of it I couldn't even tell what it was, so I couldn't repair it. Oh, and your fireworks powders were too dangerous to store in the library, flammable books, you know, so I gave them to the local fireworks shop for storage. Trixie's eyes narrowed. You don't say. Twilight Sparkle nodded and smiled in a naive and hopeful way that Trixie had no doubt was carefully crafted to get under her skin. The display of kindness had put Trixie off of her game for a moment, but the oh-so-casually mentioned repair spells had put things back on track. That was a spell an order of magnitude more difficult than anything Trixie could currently manage. Obviously, Twilight had simply been distracting her until she could get her own jabs in. Well, two could play at that game, and Twilight Sparkle was about to find out that Trixie's own horn wasn't all that blunt. So, the dream realm, Trixie said with exaggerated casualness as she buffed a hoof on her chest. It's pretty fascinating, isn't it? Trixie smirked as she saw her comment hit. Twilight's ears drooped, and she looked shamefully at the floor. Actually, I haven't made it there yet, the other mare confessed. Trixie drank in the note of bitterness she heard in her voice. Luna says I keep overthinking it, but, well, it's hard to just turn off my brain like that, you know. Trixie barely managed to avoid snarling at the comment which was, to her mind, a particularly good hit. The thought came to her, quick and furious. Is she implying that she's too smart to enter the dream realms? Well, Trixie said loftily as she tried to hide her little trembles of rage, we can't all emulate Princess Luna so easily, you know. Twilight winced. True, she said, then sighed. Still, if you have any tips or tricks, I'd appreciate it. I'm really getting frustrated, here. A flash of inspiration took Trixie in that moment. Sabotage. She could give this mare advice that would guarantee that she'd never enter the dream realms. She thought intensely for a few seconds before a wicked idea came over her. You need to focus intensely on one thing in particular, she said. That's what I did. Twilight's eyes widened. What? She asked, sounding almost desperate. What did you focus on? Wind in the trees, the gentle creaking of a wagon, and the knowledge of not a single soul within miles, but there was no chance Trixie would tell Twilight that. Instead, what she said was, something I was very familiar with. I'm afraid that wouldn't work for you. Instead, what you need to do is find something, one single thought, and run in through your head over and over again. Twilight looked doubtful. That would work. It worked for me, Trixie said. Perhaps something like a song. Or a line from a book. Twilight considered for a moment. Multiplication tables, maybe. Trixie very nearly laughed, then. It was too perfect. If overthinking was what kept the accursed mare out of the dream realm, then math problems would be perfect for ensuring her absence. Trixie cleared her throat and fought down a grin. That could work, she said with carefully feigned casualness. Oh, thank you. Twilight said. Trixie stiffened as Twilight rushed forward, but it seemed all the other unicorn wanted was to give her a hug. Thank you so much. Hey. Trixie patted her awkwardly on the back. Don't mention it. She pushed Twilight firmly away from her. Seriously, like, ever. Twilight giggled as if Trixie had been joking. Just then, their conversation was interrupted by a castle servant who called for their attention. If every pony will follow me, the servant said, I will lead you to the dinner that has been prepared. As dejected as the other candidates had been before, the promise of dinner in the palace perked many of them back up. They began filtering out of the room, many in small groups. This encounter had started roughly, but Trixie felt that she had managed to come out on top. Her success in reaching the dream realm before Twilight Sparkle was a definite win for her. Being gracious now could only help to cement her victory. She forced on a plastic smile. Well, it seems it's time for dinner, Trixie said. I suppose I shall see you there. Oh, well, Twilight ducked her head and grinned apologetically. I'm actually supposed to have dinner with Celestia and Luna tonight. Trixie gaped at her, completely lost for words. Twilight didn't seem to notice as she blathered on. I should probably get going, really, her hated nemesis said in a lilting tone, as if she hadn't just rubbed salt into an open wound. I'll see you around, Trixie. Twilight trotted away a few steps before turning and waving a hoof. It really was great to see you again. And, congratulations on making the dream guard. Trixie waved a hoof back reflexively as she made a little squeaking sound in her throat. She watched as Twilight Spark trotted perkily out the door. It took almost a full minute before Trixie's brain began working again. Somehow, Twilight had turned the tables once again, securing the win for tonight. Trixie's eyes narrowed as her blood began to boil.